So I want to thank the RPS and Steve and Ken and everyone that I was talking to before I got on, and I appreciate this opportunity, and I've looked forward to doing this, and I've been back and forth with this presentation a little bit to try to put something together, and hopefully I can bring some clarity to what I do and how I do it, and we'll see how that goes. So I have a few word slide pieces to this that that talk about my process, a little bit about what I do and how I do it, and we'll get through those. And I promise you there will be images galore at the end of all that. So so as Steve said, I'm essentially a fine art, nature, and landscape photographer, and I'm based in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. It's a small town in the panhandle of West Virginia, and it's about 70 miles from Washington, D.C. And I graduate of University of Georgia in graphic design and photography, and from Georgia Institute of Technology as an architect. And I currently work for the National Park Service in the Media Center, which is where we do exhibits and waysides and publications for all of our national parks. And if you travel over here and you've been to some of those, then you might well have seen some of my images and some of my designs in those places. I'm also a workshop leader and a guide, and I do that as a secondary thing. And I've traveled all over the West and most of the United States, and also a good deal in Iceland. Okay, so Steve, what's happening is it's frozen and I can't advance the slide.
Okay. I can't see what you're doing. I can't. Advanced sharing options. You can share. Is it not going on at all? No. I'll stop the sharing screen. You can come back in again and we'll do it again, shall we?
Yeah, let's try that again. Okay, it's advancing now.
That's you. You're on. Go.
Okay.
There we go.
Although the message is still there, so I'm not sure how to get rid of that. Okay, so I shoot landscape, architecture, and stories. As Steve intimated, I got my first camera in 1968. It was a Yashica rangefinder, and it was a present from my parents. And my dad had picked it up in Japan when he was on leave from Vietnam, and it's a great little camera, it's a little rangefinder, and I loved it, except that I knew that at some point I wanted more. And so as I got a little bit older, I moved into a Minolta system, and then I got into Nikon and was shooting Nichromats and Nikon Photomic, and then I went into medium format Pentax. And then finally in the 90s, I was shooting 4x5. And I think, as is the case with many of us who receive cameras early in our lives, we kind of take them and we sort of learn how to use them, and then we aim them at everything and anything. And I was largely self-taught, but I had photographic classes in my university major that included darkroom work. The idea of landscape photography did not take hold in me until I started spending a good bit more time outdoors. And then my view of the landscape and how to photograph it has been tempered quite a bit and influenced over the years by many people. I think, like many of us who shoot landscape, especially here, early on, I was attracted to the work of Ansel Adams and tried my best to emulate his landscape images, but with very, very mixed results. I also enjoy the work of another American photographer, Elliot Porter. I love the storytelling of Dorothea Lange. And then later on, Galen Rowell, who was quite an adventure photographer. So photography, though, changed for me in the 90s when I began to develop a little bit better understanding of the craft, and I started to take it more seriously, I think. I did a fair bit of commercial architectural work when I lived in Atlanta in those early days. And my work today is largely landscape mixed with a small amount of architectural work, what I would call rural regionalism, and then creating stories such as my ongoing work on the Icelandic Sheep Roundup. Let's see. There we go. So what I would like to say as we go through this is that this presentation and what I do is really not a manifesto. So nothing in this presentation is intended to express a right or wrong or to negate the process of others. When I teach a workshop, I think it is fairly easy to hone in on what a participant needs and is brought out by simply observing during shooting or asking questions. But when you come to a group like this and you're trying to describe one's own process, sometimes it's daunting. And for me, that process actually changes. And it has changed over the whole span of my time shooting with a camera. I don't like to be prescriptive, as there are many ways to approach crafting an image, but to say that I do not have a process or a basic foundation on how I like to make images would not be true. I do, and I'm keenly aware of that. I have a friend who recently was looking at some of my photos, and she said that she thought they were full of crisp details blended with meticulous technique. Now, I kind of was taken aback by that a little bit, and I appreciated the comment, and I actually liked the comment, but I stepped back and I thought, well, gee, does that make me too clinical in what I do? But despite that, I do try to make my process iterative in that I often circle around a bit to get where I'm going. But most of the time, I kind of end up going where, you know, I all these images end up. They kind of start in a place from the moment that I see the scene and the moment I'm taking the image. I'm thinking about how I'm going to process them, and that informs everything that I do. And so I believe in a couple of things, or at least I practice certain things. Photography for me is I think a journey of time, and it is a journey that, in my opinion, never really ends. If it ends, then we've either stopped learning or we're not here anymore. But as we progress in the craft, I think we begin to hone in on certain practices that become part of the foundation of our work. The foundation of where my work is today was laid by someone who I consider to be my first mentor, and that was a commercial photographer in Atlanta. His name was Craig Tanner. And the groundwork he gave me helped me set the baseline for what I know today. So I believe in light in all of its vagaries, and I believe in composition. The groundwork for me was always light, and light, the quality of the light in terms of its color, its warmth, coolness, its neutral, the size of the light relative to the subject, large, small, broad, narrow, soft, flat, contrasting, and finally the direction of the light. Is it side light, back light, fill light, front light, and of course, what's the angle of the light as it strikes the subject? Composition for me is really the visual weight inside the frame. And for me, that composition is controlled by the forms, the structure, the shapes and the lines, the contrast, the brightness, the tonality, the shadows, all of which are informed by the light. So composition, I would say for me, is not overtly hard to come by. I mean, I'm a graphic designer, I'm an architect, and so I've spent a lifetime arranging things on paper or in three-dimensional world. So composition kind of comes, you know, fairly easily for me, but I tinker with it all the time. So even in the landscape, I'm constantly fooling with how I'm composing things. So my practice is essentially defined and controlled, and I cannot just aim my camera at something and press the shutter. Now this is something I've tried to work on for a number of years, but I really cannot break this. And a lot of this comes from the fact that I go back to what my friend said about crisp details, meticulous technique. This has come after years of shooting with the 4x5, which requires patience and control. I brought this process over when I turned to digital. I just didn't see a way to separate it from me. I tried to break the habit, but it has never proved successful. I've worked almost exclusively on a tripod, and often with longer exposures that can exceed 2 minutes. And I work entirely in manual mode, manual focus, manual lenses, and except in rare circumstances. I keep the setup simple, and I expose to the histogram, and I often create bracketed sets for exposure and for depth of field. Now this is the part where I have some friends that don't get this, but I don't compose by looking at a composition. I compose with light first. So I see the light, and then I respond to that light into what it's doing to the forms. So often I have an internal response to a scene, and I have to work it to unlock it. So it starts with light, and then I begin to try to unpack what it is I'm seeing in front of me, and to begin to make images. And a lot of times I'll do that with what I call digital sketching, where I'll just take snapshots, and I will look for what it is that's kind of drawing me to that scene. I have over time developed a sense about a scene and the focal length of the lens that's required to capture what I see. This is a particular thing that I try to work on with my workshop students also, because they'll come with the wide lenses, the 16-35s, the 12-24s, and they plop it down, and they end up with nothing, lots of sky and lots of foreground and nothing going on. And what I try to get folks to understand is try to dissect and look at the scene in a way that you can translate what you are seeing to the lens that you need to use. And I work on this all the time, and it helps me quickly dissect what I want to do and get into the shooting process. Most of the time I set my live view screen to black and white so that I can see the composition in tonal values only with no color. Color is, I shoot color. I shoot a lot of black and white. I shoot color. But when I'm looking at a scene in front of me, I just want to know what's going on tonally. And so color for me sometimes is a distraction. So I learned years ago to make controlling the camera automatic. And to paraphrase Ansel Adams, the single most important component of a camera is the 12 inches behind it. If you do not understand your camera, its operations, menus, the way the sensor reads, the exposure triangle, and what your lenses can do, then you will be kind of lost, and you will miss shots as the light changes. So we all miss shots, but you don't want to miss them because of lack of technical control. So my first mentor, who I mentioned, Craig Tanner, told me simply, make the operation of the camera automatic. And I've taken that to heart for many, many years. Okay, a few more slides to go through here. So to sort of paraphrase, in my way of thinking, light comes first, and image needs it needs light. It needs a sense of light, and the composition is second. But obviously, it's an important component of it. Now, the thing is that when I'm doing this, when I'm looking at a scene, I'm looking at the light, I'm looking at the composition, the way I'm describing it to you is sort of broken down in a step-by-step piece, but this is all firing at the same time in my head. And so the neurons are really going. So the way this kind of started for me was I was looking at some of my early mentor work, and I really couldn't understand how he was balancing the light. And these were big light jets, 30 by 40s. And he basically said that he over time understood how the light was beginning to fall in the landscape. And the way he did that for me was he had me take a 1 degree Pentax spot meter and go out in the landscape, and I would just aim it at different elements where light was falling, like on pine trees, on grass, on red buildings, on all sorts of different structures and things like that. And I would diagram those. And this was all about learning how to relate an exposure value of light falling on an object and measured with the spot meter and applied to a zone. So this is where my understanding of the zone system kind of came into play. And this all came because I just did this over and over again when I was shooting 4x5. So the quality of the light is important. Shoulder times of the day where the light is soft and less contrasty. And I like subtle light, and that's just kissing the scene where the light has transitions and details are accentuated. And this is where shadows get revealed as well. And I love to shoot scenes where there's details in the shadows. I really don't like to have things really wildly blown out into whites or really fall into deep blacks. Although, I've said I can be iterative and change, and I sometimes will do that as well. I like to shoot predominantly in twilight zones, nautical twilight to civil to sunrise, and then the reverse of that. So that to me is when the quality of light is the best. The light is soft and low. It's the kissing light that glows and even relights after the sun is set or has risen. So this is not to suggest I don't like other kinds of light, like fog, or when the clouds blanket the landscape and create a giant softbox. This is amazing light as well. So I like to shoot in all of that. Here, we're almost to the photos. So for me, composition is about bringing the viewer into the scene, and I use things like line and shape and shadow and light as components. And I always consider the placement of these elements within the frame and always consider the corners and edges. Remember, light creates forms and the forms become the composition. I tend to work my compositions heavily. That is to say, when I find something that I'm internally responding to, I stop to work it and see if I can unlock something. I like to compose a way for the viewer to enter the scene. And we'll see that in some of the images that I bring up. I am maniacal about corners and edges, and the positioning of elements is extremely important to me. I rarely crop an image. I want the composition considered at the time that I'm actually making that capture, and that means carefully considering what is there. This comes also from the time I was shooting 4x5, where every composition was done upside down because of the way the image was displayed on the Fresnel screen. So I see the world in wide angle sometimes, and that generally is between 12 and 21 millimeters. I like complexity in my images, but often work towards simplifying them. I prefer to capture in extreme depth of field, and I like to express presence in my images through transitions of light and dark. So wide and big is something that I did early on, and I got really good at using very wide lenses and shooting landscapes. But I've been tempering that a lot, and I've been working to change it and to rein in that wide perspective and see the world a little bit more dialed in. So I've been working more in 24 millimeter and 35 millimeter zones, and in the 75 to 100 millimeter zones. Complexity is an odd way to think about it because it would intone that a lot is going on in my images. And in many of my images, there is a lot going on, but I control it, or at least I try to control it. Many scenes are complex, but I want to make the complexity make sense. So it becomes part of the story of what I'm trying to convey. So foreground, midground, background relationships are very important as framing devices. And I use other devices like leading lines and repetition of shape and juxtapositions of forms. So all this goes back to my days with 4x5. I like to think in terms of figure ground, darks and lights. And then we perceive shapes by mentally separating those shapes from their surroundings. And I often think about shapes in terms of visual dominance. The figure is the subject and the ground is the shapes that envelop that subject. So when I compose, I am making decisions about the subject and the cast of elements that support it. So I try to shoot in the type of light that allows me to separate tones, shadows, midtones, and lights, and then push them around in post-processing. And I think about this final image component even when I'm shooting. All right. So I like to create, I mentioned the idea of creating transitions. And I do this to create presence in my images, light and dark. If you push things to the lighter side and you push things to the darker side, sort of in between there, you get this sense of presence and a sense of glow to the images. So I use lights and darks to move the tonal values around when I'm processing, and I use various graduated and radial fills to isolate the figure and ground. So I also visit locations over and over again, and I think that I may share that with some of you. Um, I think especially since we've been in this COVID situation, we've all been home and we've all only been able to go out and do some of the things that are local. But I think that's actually a good thing to do. So I go over and over again. I visit at different times and seasons because those things always change. And over the time, these multiple visits become not only a record of the place, but become part of the story of that place. I do not think that I am theme based, but I do seek out stories and often discover them by sheer luck, serendipity, or just being open to something. That happened to me several years ago when I went to a sheep roundup in Iceland, and next thing you know, I've thousands of images later. I have the beginnings of what I think could be a book on that whole process. So, so I process a lot in black and white, and I do color, but I prefer black and white as can often suspend reality a bit and maintain believability. My workflow is predominantly Lightroom to Photoshop, and whatever it takes to, pull that together. All right, so we've gotten through that. So let's take a look at some images. So some of you who have been to Iceland may recognize this place. This is Dettifoss. It's a remote waterfall in Northern Ireland, in Iceland. It's a place that I've always wanted to visit. And on my first go there, I missed my first opportunity. I had a flat tire on the way out. I finally got to go a couple years later, but I went with this kind of preconceived notion of the shot. And the shot this is from the east side, and it was standing looking at the long line of the waterfall and the way it enters the gorge. And for me, this is the shot I kind of wanted to go and see and experience. And so for me, I preconceived it. This is what I was going to do. And I want to say that preconception is a good way to start, but I don't want to get preconception messed up with pre-visualization. I wanted this shot, but then I also wanted to turn away from this and see what else I could see. And I just, I caution against that, because there's that moment that if you're not careful, you don't look beyond the obvious. And I don't want to villainize preconception from the standpoint of shooting something that has already been shot. Emulating good images that you have seen is a good way to learn, and to learn about composition, and to learn whether you like it or not. And I can say that early in my life, I wanted to put my tripod in every location Ansel Adams had put his, but in so doing, I passed by thousands of good images because I was not looking. So, so this was the first shot. This was actually the first shot that I took when I arrived at Dettifoss, but it was not the whole story. And an image can tell a story conveyed through a sense of time and place, through emotion, through light, form, and composition. But I feel that in the case of the landscape, especially this landscape, this single image is just a chapter of that book. So I often use, to help me with this, I often use words to help me visualize a story and help focus me on the imagery. So for those of you who've been here, the roar of this place is astounding. And if you go to the edge, it can make you, I don't know, it's just, you can levitate off the edge here. It's unbelievable how amazing this location is. And there is, you know, the roar is massive. It's an abyss. There's fear, there's rush. The water is rolling through here. It's expansive, there's movement. And so I really wanted to, you know, try to find those kinds of shots and try to convey that. So this was the first shot. This was the preconceived shot, but then I began to look a little closer. So this was another shot, and I was here for, oh, I don't know, 3.5 to 4 hours from before sunrise and up to the early morning. And so I shot a lot of images here. And so I'm only going to show you a couple of these from Dettifoss, but this gets to the point where I was talking about there's complexity and then simplifying that complexity down a little bit. So really two massive forms, the foreground rocks, the background, and then the water and all that mist and steam flowing off of there. So I was really trying to convey the sense of the rush of the water and the movement and the roar that was going on. So this was trying to make something that was complex into something a little more simple and still tell the story. And then I turned my head and I looked downstream, and here's this. So now I've got a strong sense of line. I've got the massive forms of the canyon itself, and I've got this beautiful light and the way the river kind of goes off into the background. And then you can see the light gray colored rock. I call that the diving board. And that's the way that the viewer can actually sort of physically think about standing on that and enter that particular scene. And then taking this and twisting this a little bit more, I begin to get different shapes and different lines in this scene. So now I've got the foreground and the way it's rocky and jagged. I've got the rush of the water, and then I've got the massive wall that's on the other side. And for a sense of scale, you can just look at the very tip top up there, and you can see the little bit of boardwalk. And that will give you a sense of just how massive this area is. So again, strong use of leading line, movement from light to dark. Then I began to step back. Let's take a look at what the whole scene looks like. And this is, again, the theme is about the shape of the forms, the lines, the light, the expansive sense of this, the scale and the movement and the atmospherics that were going on. I mean, that's from the point, I was pretty far downstream from this, but the mist was rolling that day, and was, you know, I was constantly having to clean off the lens of my camera because you can see it was entering into the scene even as far downriver as I was. And then I pull back even farther, and this is the set shot. Now this is actually the shot that if you were to walk down the trail, you would see this first. But again, my sense of preconceptions passed by all this, went up to the very front corner up there next to the waterfall and shot that first. And then what I did was I kind of backed up a little bit and got more of a sense of the place. I then went further upstream from the waterfall, and this is going towards a waterfall called Selfoss, which is just above it. Here the landscape is different. The river is really wide, and it drops into a much more expansive canyon. And the waterfalls all along that wall were amazing. And here I'm working on line again. So there's a line of the water, and then there's a line of the clouds that were mirroring that and creating that kind of dynamic flow. And then further upstream from that is Selfoss itself. So this was much later in the morning. The light was a little hotter. And so this was really just, you know, I went with a little bit faster shutter speed so I could actually get the rivulets of water, and you just accentuate the textures. And I think that helped convey a little more tortuous kind of sense to this image. So let's calm that down just a little bit. This is in a location called Vesterhorn. And normally when I've shot here, I've had the mountain completely open, and we'll look at some shots in a few minutes on that. But on this particular morning, completely socked in. Clouds had dropped down to the point where you couldn't even see anything. And this is shot very, very early in the morning. And I just had to exercise a little bit of patience. And I went down to the beach and set up for a shot. And just about 30 minutes after I got there, the clouds lifted a little bit, and a little form of Batman, that little mountain that's in the background there, everyone calls it Batman. That was revealed, and this was about a 30 to 40 second exposure, I think. And so it gave a sense of movement to the clouds, but it gave this beautiful sense of movement to the water. And when you put water like that under a long exposure, you get these beautiful tonalities to it. You get lights and grays, these midtones, and you can really accentuate those and bring them out. So this is Reynisfjara Beach. Again, the same thing, early in the morning, and it's a very calm day. I don't know if any of you saw recently, but there was a death here yesterday or the day before from a sneaker wave. This can be a very benign location to shoot in, or it can be a very, very dangerous location because the waves can come in really hot and heavy. And so a young lady was there and was swept out to sea by a sneaker wave. So, all of us who have visited us, our heart goes out to that person's family, but you really have to be careful when you're here. This day, much calmer, very nice and calm, and again, a long exposure allowed me to record a really nice sense of light, and use that light and use the dark shadows to express the sense of this image. I'll go to, bear with me, y'all. I'm going to take a drink here. So this next shot, again, I'm going to show a sequence for this one. This is an unnamed waterfall in an area, the highland area of Iceland called Karlingafjall. And this was shot from the bridge. I'd seen it on the way in. And on the way out, we had kind of a nice light. You can see the clouds were really nice, and everything was sort of clearing, storm was clearing. And I made this shot, and it's a shot I really like. I like the perspective of it. I love the sense of the way the water is dropping over all these boulders. And but again, telling the story a little differently, I moved down. I got under the bridge, and I began to see what the area looked like from a different perspective. And I really like this perspective as well. You're more into it. Now the flow of the water is kind of, right there at you. So I'm using that strong foreground element to help sort of lead you into the scene. Now the cool thing is I was able to carefully move around a little bit more, and I was able to get inside the waterfall a little bit. And here it takes on a different character. So now I'm really using the foreground. You can see how the swoop of the foreground sweeps around and leads you into the big rocks and the boulder. And so this was about telling the story of this waterfall through three to four shots. I think I may have shot maybe 10 or 15 images here, but these are the three that were my favorite. So again, it's working the scene. You see it, you photograph it, and then you begin to work it, and you begin to see what else you can get out of it, and how you can change your perspective on it. All right. So sheep, I have quite a love for Icelandic sheep. I have lots of photographs of them. This particular one, I was shooting at a waterfall location and looked up on the hillside, and there he was. And for me, I just put a long lens on, and I grabbed about 2 shots before he moved on. And he looked at me, and that's the shot that I was fortunate to get. And so this is about isolation for me. It's isolation of the subject matter, which is the sheep. And so I use lights and darks for that. Of course, the sheep's wool is white, dirty white. He's been out in the field for quite some time. But I was able to bring that out, use the darkness, and then also to reflect the texture of the sheep's wool and relate that to the texture of the grasses that are in front of him. And so that was the image, and that was the way I kind of conceived it. A lot of times I shoot into I get into stormy situations like this, and this is a time frame when you can really capture some dramatic light and dramatic landscapes. And this is the case where I'm shooting into a backlight scenario. So the light back there was really pretty hot, and so it took several exposures to expose for the clouds, and then it was a blending of all that together in Photoshop to bring it out. But it's about the line of the river and the shapes of the landscape, and then that beautiful storm that's in the background. And you can change that up. And so here is a totally different way of looking at that. This is also a strong backlight situation, shot on a completely different trip. We had almost some clouds in the sky, but the sun was pretty bright coming in on us. So, you know, you have to, what do you do with that? You can accept it and shoot in it and try to find a way to manipulate the light and make it work. In this case, you know, I used the dark forms of the rock wall against that whiteness, and then I used a little bit of manipulation of the water so that you start your line of the water and then you follow it along and you see it ended up in the back. Both of those images were shot at a waterfall called Hyafoss. Okay. So this is a small waterfall called Kvernefoss, and this particular image was shot really as it's really about the repetition of shape. It's the three boulders and how the three boulders kind of are part of the scene, and the waterfall is sort of a character in the cast, if you will. But I really was enamored with the boulders and the haircuts they had on top of them. And so this framing was about taking that and just making an image out of it. But with a little bit of a shift in perspective, again, I moved over, got into the water, and now the waterfall is revealed. The boulder becomes the supporting element. So in the other one, to me, the waterfall was the supporting element, and now the waterfall is the main element in this one. And you see the strong line of the water coming down and the water sweeping out towards the foreground. And again, this is the place where your eye can come into the image and get into it and start to roll around. And then you can really get switching up. And so I completely changed perspectives on everything. And this time I'm wading out into the middle of the stream, and now I'm using the boulders as the set piece and the shapes and the diagonal lines and everything. And then the waterfall is that little element that's in the back. So 3 shots, same location, almost shot within, 10 or 15 feet of each other, but you get totally different perspectives based on how you move around those shots. So moving and repositioning is really, really important thing. And it's something I do in my work all the time. This is Vesterhor again. I promised I'd show you another one of that. This is when the mountain was kind of up and out, and clouds sitting over top of it. It's at sunrise. And here I'm just mirroring the shapes of the dunes against the shapes of the mountains. Real simple composition, and then playing with the light. So here's a complex image. This is a waterfall that's in Western Pennsylvania. And it's really an amazing place to photograph. There's ferns, there's lichens on the wall, there's all kinds of stuff going on here. And this is really where I talked about juxtaposition of form. This is one where I did that. This is again the juxtaposition of the massive rock wall piece on the right hand side, and then the water on the left, and then the rocks that are on the far left hand side. So those are kind of framing the waterfall, and you have that wonderful log that's kind of stuck in there. And then again, there's the diving board effect that I kind of use, where you can kind of step out on that rock covered with ferns and leaves, and just kind of be in the scene. And this is one of my favorite photographs from this location. So I like to isolate also. This is a gigantic hackberry tree that is in one of our national battlefields, and I visit this tree quite a bit. And when it's foggy, it completely isolates itself, and these fields are still planted. And in this case, the summer wheat was in place, but they grow corn here and they grow soybeans. And so, I photograph it all the time with all those sorts of crops in place. And sometimes in the winter, there's no crops. And so I have quite a series of photographs. But when the fog hits in our area, it is just luminous, and it glows. And when the sun comes up, it's just amazing kind of thing to shoot in. And so this is really sort of an isolation shot. This is back to Iceland again. This is a location in the Snæfell's Peninsula. That's the Snæfellsjökull. That's the big glacier. And this shot it's really about scale for me. And we were lucky that day that the glacier was completely open, had some open clouds kind of flowing over the top of it. But it was amazing to see how massive that glacier is. And here's this little house down there. And what a landscape. I mean, whoever lived in that house, it's just amazing to me to think that you would go out your front door every day, and this is the landscape you would see. It's quite spectacular. We're going to see a variation of this here in a minute in color. So, Steve, are we good on time?
Yeah, still pretty good. You've still got 20 minutes or so to go, no problems.
Oh, great. Cheers. Back to scale again. This is another area in Clearfield, and really I was really trying to frame something having to do with the folds of the Rhyolite Hills, and all of a sudden these two hikers came into view, and I'm like, thank you very much. And so I was able to capture them lit up beautifully and show the scale of them against what this area looks like. And of course I had gorgeous light that morning as well. So I've talked a little bit about leading lines. This is an extreme example of leading lines. I love to find locations like this where there's drainage areas and water's coming out of the mountains and spreading itself out, and I can use those lines to help frame the image and tell a little bit of a story about this location. This is in a flat volcanic plain near a mountain called Midafell in Iceland, and we're completely socked in when we arrived up here, and we waited for about 20 minutes, and all those clouds began to lift, and the sun was kind of beginning to peek through back behind those mountains, and it was absolutely magical. And this was one of several shots I got that used the lines in the foreground to lead you off into the mountains in the background. This is the White Church in Vik, and one of my favorite churches to shoot, and it's really spectacular to shoot if you can do it with fog. And I've had that happen to me a couple of times, and it was interesting because I had this completely framed up and was getting ready to shoot, and this couple walked out, and I was like, well, should I wait for the couple? And I decided to capture them. Again, I went for the sense of scale on this, but I also I also like it. I like the way that they are a couple. They're his arm is around hers, and they're pointing at something off in the landscape, and the church is there as part of the scene. So I left them in. I thought that really helped make this image. And again, I was working with strong depth in the foreground to darken down some parts of the sky, and then bring the whites out in the church itself. Again, this is from one of the landscapes around where I live. Again, the fog gets real luminous here, and this is really about the strong sense of that luminance, the depth in the foreground. And this was just planted in winter wheat, and then the line of those trees as they're moving, from the dark on one side and into the fog on the other, and then the barn just kind of in repose with all this magnificent light going on around it. This is in an area called White Sands in New Mexico. Again, I'm using a relationship of light and dark, and then I'm also using a relationship of movement here. So the movement of the ripples of the sand are kind of mirrored in an opposite way by the way the clouds were sitting over top of this scene, and then I use the darkness on the left-hand side to kind of anchor that, and everything kind of emanates from that darkness and flows outward from it. Just a simple isolation shot again of the lighthouse on the top of Dahorle in near Vik, and you can see rain is stronger way off to the right there. And again, it's typical to what I would do with scenes like this. I shoot them in those shoulder times of light, so I get really nice, beautiful light on lighting up the subject, and I have really nice shadows that I can play with. And then I use those shadows and I deepen things down, and I bring out the grasses, so I bring the textures back into it. And I love the way the cloud was kind of drifting away from the lighthouse, almost as if that was the light itself. But moving a little quicker. Again, another subject. This is an isolation shot, foggy conditions, soft light conditions. I mentioned talking about words. This one is one about loneliness to me. It's about home, it's path, journey, about moving onward. And I shoot this location a lot because I have those emotions when I go there. And this gets back to talking about shooting places a lot and how things change and how the light changes. So these are just some other shots from there where the clouds were streaming in one and they were really wild going in the other, like a big haircut. And then you change sides, and then the one in the bottom left, you can see the building, but then you can see that giant hackberry that I shoot a lot as well. So within a span of not, of a pretty close area, I can get to a lot of different things to shoot and kind of work over and over again as I try to unpack the things that are there. Another architectural shot. This is the Rotunda of Thomas Jefferson at University of Virginia. And really, I shot this early in the morning. Sun's coming up off to the right. And I framed this in a way with multiple exposures that I could darken down the surrounding foreground and the trees, and then bring up the building itself. Small church in Iceland. A lot of times we like to have clouds. A lot of times we don't get clouds, but it doesn't really matter. If you're shooting at the right time and you have the opportunity and you can shoot in a twilight condition, shooting without clouds can actually be a good way to isolate your subject matter. So you get, and in this case, I knew the building was going to get a really nice kiss of light, and it's kind of a painted aluminum, and so I knew it was going to light up really nicely against the dark backgrounds of the greens of the grave area, and then the mountains in the background. And then I just use a little bit of darkening of the sky to kind of bring it all together. But one of the things I like about this shot is not only the light that's hitting the church, but I love the way the light is hitting the crosses in the graveyard itself. So there's a metaphor for that as well. All right. Another simple isolation shot, and this kind of shows you, this is a barn I shoot periodically, and I like to shoot structures like this, and I like to isolate them, but I also like to bring out grasses and contrast. And so this is one of those instances where I'm actually shooting the thing itself, and then I'm framing it with the grasses, and then the processing is all about those juxtapositions and bringing those together. All right. So the next few slides, and we're going to get into some color ones, and then we'll get into some questions. Is I've been shooting the Icelandic Sheep Roundup for a number of years now, and it's an amazing event. And there's a whole year-long process that goes on with sheep in Iceland from birthing. They turn them out, send them up to the highlands, then they got to go gather them from the highlands, and then they bring them to this gigantic ring, and they sort them, and they get them back to their owners. So it's a massive people process, but it's also a big cultural event in Iceland, and I love it for many reasons. But one of those is that because the farmers all work together to bring everybody's sheep home, not sheep's home. So I love the concept of working together and how they do that, and it's a shared response and a shared responsibility. So that's actually my friend's hand, and I was gonna do a portrait of this sheep, and she reaches in to grab him, and I think it made the shot. It's one of my favorite shots I've ever done from there. So we'll go through a couple others. This is like the sheep have been gathered, but this is a sorting process, and I was lucky enough on this one. I actually photographed this scene, but I also got into the line with the farmers on this one, and it helped them, sort the sheep out and get them into the wagon. Oops. So this is what it looks like in one of the big rings. That's probably 1,500 sheep crammed into this gigantic ring, and then you see all the people sitting on the sides of the ring, or sitting or standing. And what they have to do now is wade into that group, that lot of sheep, and figure out whose sheep are whose, and then sort them and put them into their own paddocks. And those paddocks, you can see them, those little fenced areas that they're standing by. So the cool thing about it is they have ear tags, but most Icelandic farmers who have a lot of sheep they know their sheep just by looking at them. So I find that to be absolutely amazing. They all have sort of characteristics to them, and they recognize it, and they generally know. So, but this is what it looks like. It's like mass chaos. And the cool thing about it is, once all this is going on, and they begin to empty the sheep out a little bit, and the ring gets there's less sheep in the ring, then it's like water. They just are flowing back and forth, and they're resisting being caught. But ultimately, they're all caught, and they all get in their paddock, and they all have to go home to their respective farms. And so this thing is about all the whole process of this, the celebration of it, but it's also about the people that are doing this. And here, these are shots of tag, they're checking the tags, they're getting the sheep into their paddocks, and to bring them to the paddocks, they'll step over top of them, lift them up by the horns, and kind of walk them over. They don't get hurt in this process, but it's just amazing to be in the ring and photographing all this sort of chaos going on. And what you have to do is be there enough to be able to isolate and to tell the story. These are more portraits. All these people are people I know. They're farmers I know that I've gotten to know over the years going there. So it's given me great access for being part of it. The kids get into it, and of course, you know, it's work. It's literal work for these people. And the great thing is, at the end of all this, they get out their flask and they drink and they start singing songs, because it really is the end of the culmination of a year-long process. All right, I have a few color slides to go through, and then I think, Steve, if we have time for questions, we'll go from there. So I showed you the White Church at Vic. This is a color version of that, shot at the same time. The only difference is I switched position on this, and I wanted to feature the imposing sea stacks of Rainesdranger as part of that. This is a shot where I did not preconceive this shot, I pre-visualized this shot. And because I had been here before, I knew that if with the right lens and the right kind of conditions, I could frame the church and also have the sea stacks in it. And to me, it's one of my favorite shots I've ever made here. I had to have some patience. When I first set up, the fog was completely down over top of the stacks, but I gave it about 30 minutes and it lifted a little bit, and a little bit of light started to come through underneath and lit it up. And it was, you know, it was a magical moment. I talk about framing shots so that people, to give you a sense of actually being here. This is an unnamed waterfall in Iceland that I take my workshop groups to, and you have to kind of climb up into this alcove, and it's fairly expansive. But when you're standing up there and looking back out, it's amazing how this thing is circling over top of you, and the water's coming down on top of you, and then the water, and then the line as it goes out towards the river. But this is a case where I really like to sort of put a viewer into a perspective of actually feeling like they're in the shot. Another one for scale. This was shot at the same time I shot the black and white version. This is pulled much further back. And in this case, I knew the hikers were going down there, and I just waited. And I got extremely lucky in the way the smoke from the fume vents came up, the sun lit them, and those hikers, I just waited for them to get right into the middle of that, and I made that shot. So again, it's about the scale and the immensity of this area, and then the four hikers as they're moving off into the landscape. This is scale from a different standpoint. This is inside of an ice cave. This was at the very backside of a cave, and I came to this hole, and the sun was coming through, and it was just sort of radiant as it came in there. And so this shot was really about capturing that radiance and the sense of transparency and translucency on the ice itself. So a few more shots. So I mentioned a lot about texture and contrast in texture. This is another case. This is a church called Valneskirkja in Iceland, and it sits in a field of grass that's completely mowed, but off to the side are these hillsides that are completely covered in this wild kind of unmowed grass. And I much preferred those, framing against that. And this is another case where I use color, in this case blue golds, to which are really good, beautiful color combinations, and so I color graded it in a way that I think is really effective in communicating this image. The black and white barn that I just showed you, this is what it looks like in color early in the morning, and so it gets this beautiful side light, lights up the face of the barn, and you got this nice shadows off to the right, and then you've got these gorgeous grasses. And this is a case where you have to go back over and over again, because they mow this field all the time, and so I have to wait for it to grow up and then then I can shoot it, and then they mow it, and it grows up and they mow it. Now they've got cows in there, and it makes it sometimes difficult to shoot. So let's step back to that black and white waterfall I showed you. This is the color version of it. This is again moving to a little bit different position. Now I have the diving board, or the way to step onto the rock is right in front of you, and I've got the waterfall coming down, both from the left side, from the bottom, and also from all the way across the top of the thing. The beautiful greens, the lichens, really made the color version of this work, I think, extremely well. Every now and then I come up with some sunset shots. This is the Ice Lagoon at Jokey-Sarlin. This is a long exposure. I think I was well over a minute on this one, and really this was about the coldness of the location, yet it had a warmth to it. And then I was also playing with the repetition of shape because of the way the cloud up above the iceberg, looked a lot like the iceberg itself. It was just sort of a repetition of that shape and the way it kind of streamed off. All right. This is a waterfall in West Virginia. This is it's marking of time. This waterfall flows pretty consistently throughout the year, and at certain times of the year, it will send little bubbles into a pool. And under a long exposure, in this case, I think this was about 16 to 20 seconds, it makes a beautiful spiral. And so I shoot this quite a bit, and I love to shoot the spirals, and the sense of that motion, and the sense of what that means in terms of just the flow of time. And it's a kind of a calming kind of shot for me. This is in the Rocky Mountains. This is aspens. Again, I'm playing with textures, and I'm juxtaposing those textures against the aspen trees. And this also, I'll say something about trees. I believe that if you're going to photograph trees, and I tend to photograph them a good bit, trees need to have their own space when you're photographing them. I think they need to be revealed and not hidden behind another tree. It's kind of hard to do, but I think they should be expressed in an image as completely as possible. And this took a little bit of finagling to get that to happen, but I did. I was able to get the main tree, and then the other trees and the ones off in the background to kind of be in their own space, so that you could realize each of them as part of the composition. Back to isolation again. This is that waterfall Klingerfjall, and here the color version of it is I'm just playing with the light, the way the light's hitting those greens, and then that beautiful shaft of light coming down and hitting the plunge pool at the bottom. Well, all about the light here, and it's all about the layers, the landscape, the volcanic landscape in front, and the way that gives way to the rhyolite hills at Klingerfjall, and the clouds that were sitting over top of it, and the mass of clouds. I mean, those mountains are big, and you can imagine what those clouds are like, just gigantic. And then the sun broke through, and it was amazing how it just streamed light across this landscape. Excuse me for 1 second. Again, my favorite kind of landscape. I'm playing with tonal values, warms and cools. I'm playing with leading lines, and I'm playing with foregrounds, and a way for the viewer to come into the shot and to try to experience what I was seeing as I was shooting. I think we have a few more here. This is in an area in West Virginia called Dolly Sods. And in the fall, these are huckleberries and blueberry plants. And they this is what happens. They turn this vibrant shade of red. And when we get rain on these granite type boulders, they're kind of glacier erratics, and the pools will fill up, and you get this beautiful glowing light. And you know, if you're there at the right time, when it's calm, because this place blows wind like crazy. When it's calm, it is just a beautiful place to be when the sun's coming up. In this case, this is sunrise, and I'm just getting this nice kind of soft glow. And then you can get a magical light that happens where it's like this, and this is more of a directed side light. So the sun's way off to my camera left. It's just coming up, it's just clearing through the clouds, and it will just stream right on across. And it really, the way it kisses the tops of the rocks and the trees and the tops of the huckleberry is just amazing. Back to Vesterhorn. This was a no cloud day. Been there when there's been massive clouds. I've been there when it's been completely covered up. And then I've been there when it's like this, when there's no clouds. Doesn't really matter to me. It's a phenomenal location. And it really, to me, is about being inside the dunes and capturing the light as it's coming up and framing it against those mountains. Over to the right, you can see that the frame of Batman, the little peaked mountain. And the tonal value here was, again, as I was working on blues and golds when I color graded this. And just trying to pick out some of those colors so that it gave it a sense of presence that would be a little bit different than what I might normally do, which was just record it straight on. I then moved downward into the dunes, and I captured a different, you know, again, work the shot, work the place. And in this case, I worked down into the dunes, and you know, I worked a really close into perspective of the grasses. And then Vesterhorn, the main frame of Vesterhorn is rising off between those frames of grasses. So I think this is a composition that I really enjoy and was successful. This is an area in the Southwest. This is it's about my favorite theme. It's about lines, and this is called Sherbet Rocks, and it's in a place called White Pockets. And this is sandstone on steroids, absolutely. This is all water and wind erosion that causes this. And this is really all about that light, that glowing light at the end of the day, and the way the lines of the sandstone, the white sandstone and the red sandstones come down and create that image. And we'll go back to Snæfell's again, and this is that same little house. This was shot at a different time frame. Glacier was completely covered at this point, but again, the sense of scale is fantastic, and the sense of light, in this case, the way the light just streamed right across the grassy field and really lit up the house was what this capture was all about. And then we'll end on this one. Again, you know, the themes that I've been talking about: light, contrast, strong lines, are all sort of evident in this shot. And you know, I'll end with these words of this was vastness and openness for me, and it also is an image of promise. And for me, it's the desire to see what lies beyond that long thin line down there, because I know there's something out there to shoot, and it just reminds me to get out there and keep doing it. So I think that's it. That's me sorting sheep at one of the roundups, and I can move this out of the way. There's my web address and my Instagram address. And with that, Steve, I think we can, if I've gone too fast, I apologize. I can always go back to something. or are there questions?
Yeah, so that was that was a real show through everything, wasn't it? You'd said earlier on that you practiced a lot, and it reminded me I play quite a lot of golf, and Gary Player said that the more he practiced, the luckier he got. And that was a response to somebody who said he was lucky coming out of a bunker. And you can see the practice in your photography, although I think you're doing yourself a bit of disservice because you grabbed that sheep pretty quickly and got that one looking at you. So you can swing it with the best of them as well. So and you can definitely you can feel the Ansel Adams kind of influence coming through. He had a book called The Eloquent Light, and that I suppose is part of your theme, isn't it? That always look for the light. That's where the story lies, and it is an element. Yeah. There's a poetry about your images that really does come through quite strongly.
Well, it is I think it has taken a lot of wandering in the photographic wilderness to come there. I think many of us who shoot, we go out and we shoot, and we keep plying away, and we keep reading, and we keep working at it. And I think I did that for a number of years, and I think it really took someone kind of taking me a little bit by the hand and helping me focus a little bit on how to look at things and how to think about it. And I think that's what was the starting point for me. And then it was just practicing those concepts, just real simple concepts, being automatic with my camera, try to understand what the light's doing and what's going on, and then composing around that. And I think that really is, it's quite simply how I do things. And then I'm shooting and I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about what that process is going to be as I go forward. So I do connect the shooting moment to the processing moment. It doesn't always work. I can tell you, it doesn't always work at all. It's sometimes it's iterative, and sometimes I get something on screen and go, oh my God, what was I thinking on that? That just is not good. And in some cases, I just put that away, won't look at it again, and I'll come back to it later. And so that's actually another point I'll make. I get onto my workshop participants because they'll shoot and then they'll chimp. They'll keep looking at the screens, and I'm like, stop looking at your screens. Just turn your screen off. At some point, shoot the image. Let's go to the next one. Compose and shoot. And if you want to look at your images later that night or download them, that's fine. But let's not do that when we're out in the field shooting, because it lessens your ability to actually look and keep seeing what's going on around you. So I don't know how many times that people will be shooting to forward, and I'm going, the light's actually happening behind you, turn around, or hey, look left, or look left or right, because look how the light is actually kissing the top of those, rhododendrons or those huckleberries or something like that. It's trying not to get so locked in and so focused that you're not stopping to take a breath and look. So we all do it. I can get into some amazing, light things going on, and I'm just kind of like focused on the thing in front of me. So I'm just as guilty as anybody doing that. But I think for me, it came down to just a few simple concepts, understanding the exposure triangle, and just knowing how I can manipulate that to get what I need in an image. And I also, I mentioned depth of field, and I do a lot of focus bracketing. And because in my days with 4x5, because I use the tilt shift components of a 4x5, I was able to get near to far focus on everything I shot. I've never varied from that. I don't see the landscape without that kind of depth of field and that kind of focus. Now the sheep shot you mentioned, yeah, there's a little bit of soft focus on that. And I deliberately did that because I really wanted just that layer of the sheep and a little bit of those grasses. So that's one where I just had to, like, I shot, there he was. I shot, aimed, and aimed and shot, and it was done. But for the most part, when I'm actually framing, I'm considering the foreground, the midground, the background, and I am putting all that into focus. And I'm using my camera to capture those components, and then I put them together in Photoshop.
There's a comment there from Paul Gray, and he says that everybody, there's been a few comments about the quality of the images, and Paul hints up also the quality of the dialogue beside it. And I think you've been very generous in sharing your thoughts and your kind of processes. And I think the 5 before stuff, I mean, I go back to those kind of days as well. And we all, nowadays with digital, you can just go on the motor button and press it and shoot away. But it does pay to sit back and simplify. And you talked about complex images and simplistic photographs. And you had them there. You had very complex movement images, but they were very simplistically done. And that belies a great craft, and that's what we all aspire to. So I think we're all delighted to have seen the photographs tonight and to have heard your sort of journey to get there. Been very invigorating and very, I see everybody's saying just how wonderful it is. It's great. Thank you very much.
Oh well, I have to say I'm completely humbled by that. I appreciate this chance to have been able to talk with everybody, and photography is. I mean, to do this through Zoom, boy, I'd love to be able to be in a room with everybody.
Yeah.
I think we all would like to be that, but I think in this day and age, and going through what we've been going through, to be able to do this through Zoom and to connect to so many people, I think is phenomenal. I think that's one of the things about photography that I really have come to love so much is it's as much about getting in the field and shooting, but it's about doing that with your mates, with your friends, and sort of being with them and part of what they're doing. And yeah, I think making those connections is one of the things that makes photography such an amazing venture that we all do.
Yeah, it is. So Paul's also asked, as a rough guide, how much prep do you do? How much background do you do before you go into a site? Do you do lots of looking at other photographs? Do you do lots of looking at things on the website and webcams, or do you just go and read up a bit when you're there? Or
yes and no. So I do prep. Iceland I'll use Iceland as an example. I do prep. I do look at some images where I try to get a sense of what the area is like. I use Google Earth a good bit to kind of look at what the landscape looks like. I use, once I kind of have a sense of what I think the area might look like, I then we'll look at some images. I don't, but I want to be careful, and this is the thing that I don't want to get into, is where I look at something and go, oh, that's the shot I want, and just get locked into something. I really like to get a sense of what the area is like, and then go in and make my own kind of decisions about it, about what I want to shoot and how I want to shoot it. And when I went to Klingerfjall, for instance, where those shots were the Rhyolite Hills with the people, well, I kind of seen all that, and I said, okay, that's what we're going to go shoot. I didn't show shots from there that I've made on subsequent trips that are nothing like that. And so for me, one visit is always not enough. I think you have to go back. I think you have to see it one time. I don't think your images are as good as they can be as they would be on the second and the third time. And so that's why I always try to revisit locations, because I think that, especially if I'm very interested in that place, I just think it's, I think you get more out of it when that happens, and you get better images, and you get to know it better. And then you might meet people who go, oh, hey, you can go over here, you should see this thing, and you should see this thing. And when I went to Klingerfjall the first time, I shot the Rhyolite Hills and all that. When I went the second time, then I found the waterfalls, right? So then I found all the things that were things I missed on the first go round. And so that just opened me up to what else is in the place. So I do research. I do ask people. I do Google Earth. I will look at images. I look at an app called it's an ephemeris app that gives me the sunrise and sunset, so I know the angles, at different times of the year. So I get a sense of what's going to happen in that location. So yeah.
So if groundhogs could take photographs.
Yeah.
Now Anne's got a question. So Anne, give us your question. Have you got your hand up there? You're going to give us a question, Anne? You can unmute if you want and ask your question direct to Robert. Oh, maybe not. Maybe just click the wrong button. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a night at that then. Again, on behalf of RPS in general and RPS Scotland in particular, because we're the host for tonight, I'd like to thank Robert for coming all the way from West Virginia into our wee homes in bonny Scotland and beyond. I know we've all enjoyed it. The images have been great. The philosophy has been good. The dialogue's been generous and instructive. And it gives us all something to think about when we go out there. Simple, complex, practice a lot, be aware of what's going on. It's all the yin and yang, isn't it? It's all how we all got to do. So I'd like to thank you all for coming along tonight. I'd like to point you towards our website so you can see the other talks have coming up, and hopefully we'll see you all at other ones. So thank you very much all for coming along, and thank you, Robert, for your help tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much to everyone. I appreciate it.